The Treasure of Sierra Madre, directed by John Huston, follows three prospectors on a hunt for gold in 1920s Mexico. There they have their morality tested by bandits, nature, and ultimately each other. The name, posters and music present it as a grand adventure, but it's pretty small in scale, consisting of about 3 characters talking to each other at any given time, and the cinematography reflects this, being motivated by the performances rather than trying to inspire awe. There's a part where the protagonist set out, dramatic music kicks in, and are just preparing their donkeys for the ride ahead. The film's pacing is razor sharp. The last 40 minutes takes place over a few days, but the first hour 20 spans shy of a year, moving days, weeks, and even months between scenes, with the story and editing so tight you couldn't shave off 30 seconds without losing something. These frequent time jumps are naturally a vehicle for leaps in character progression, which can feel a little awkward when we see a person consider leaving someone to die, when 10 minutes prior they were best friends, with very little connective tissue, but we'll get to that. Then there's the characters. Ask anyone who's seen it, or even if they haven't, it's kind of predictable, what the message is, and they'll tell you it's greed, with a capital G. This isn't wrong, but it feels overly simplistic given that we'll get to that too. The theme, whatever it is, acts as the film's foundation, for which the rest of the story is built on top of, especially the protagonists, who each have their own relationship with it that's shown through their varying reactions to similar trials. But what is this theme? Well, for formatting reasons I can't tell you, but let's go through the film together and you should pick it up pretty quickly. Part 1. We meet our first hero as he's tearing up a losing lottery ticket, before begging someone for money whilst looking them in the eyes. He gets rejected and tries someone else, this time looking down. Say hello to Dobbs. He's given money and immediately spends it on a meal, water and cigarettes, when a kid selling lottery tickets comes up to him. Having just lost the lottery, he's, and I'm putting this politely, hesitant, but caves and buys one anyway. Before he does though, he insults the kid by calling him a beggar. Get away from me, you little beggar. Despite being one himself. He also wastes his water and spends what small amount of money he has on luxury items. Which there's nothing inherently wrong with. You're homeless. You deserve to treat yourself. But it's an early example of a consistent trait where he never looks ahead. Something that will really come to bite him later. We meet our second protagonist as Dobbs sits down next to a fellow American sleeping on a bench. Dobbs offers him a cigarette. How generous.
The benevolence!
And they start chatting. Say hello to Curtin. This is not the last time he'll get a handout from Dobbs. They talk about their inability to get jobs as non-natives, and Dobbs rattles off a few hypotheticals, which is another subtle example of a character trait that's going to come back to bite him. Aside from that, this conversation demonstrates that neither Dobbs nor Curtin is afraid of hard work. It's only a matter of opportunity. Dobbs then sees but doesn't recognise the guy he got money from earlier, and goes to beg from him again, still avoiding his eyes. He's given more money and spends it on a haircut, which seems to bring up his confidence as he displays it by not putting his hat on. And when begging from someone else, who is actually the same guy again, he looks him in the eyes. The man does give him money but brings up that this is the 3rd time he's done so, and tells Dobbs to leave him alone, or something like that.
But from now on, you have to make your way through life without my assistance.
Put a pin in that. As you probably noticed, Dobbs has a strong sense of dignity. He wants to look respectable. He calls other people beggars as if he isn't one himself, and when asking for money, he doesn't just say to people he wants, or worse, needs it, he asks if they'll buy a meal for a fellow American.
Will you take a fellow American to a meal? Will you take a fellow American to a meal? Will you take a fellow American to a meal?
And after the first guy wounded his pride, he can't even look them in the eye when doing so. Also, this film is from the 40s, so they couldn't be explicit, but it's heavily implied after this Dobbs visits a sex worker. Which, again, probably not the best use of his money. In the next scene, he tries to beg from a guy walking out a bar, and meets Pat McCormick, a local contractor, who refuses to give him money, but offers a job on the spot. Dobbs asks what the catch is, something no one could lie about, and Pat tells him there isn't one. Dobbs asks about the pay, then agrees. Dobbs agrees to hop on a boat to somewhere with some guy he met 28 seconds ago and doesn't even know the name of yet, to do a job he knows nothing about. This seems like a pretty clear-cut example of him being short-sighted. Because it is. But Pat doesn't exactly give him time to breathe, and although the town offers some level of stability, that's not exactly stable. And he was just talking with Curtin about how he wants a job but can't get one earlier today, so he can't pass it up. Speaking of Curtin, look who's also on a ferry. The film jumps forward a month, and we learn Dobbs and Curtin have been working 16 to 18 hour days in the hot sun, and aren't being paid until the job's done, which won't be for another 2 weeks. Again, these two aren't afraid of working damn hard so long as the pay's good, and Pat promises it is. In fact, he's giving them a bonus, all as soon as they step off the boat. We jump ahead 2 weeks and everyone steps off the boat, but Pat says the money man isn't here. He gives Dobbs and Curtin $10 to buy a few drinks, saying he'll meet them in a bar at 3 o'clock. At 7 o'clock, they ask a bartender if they've seen him, and are overheard by a charming fellow who informs them that their trust may have been misplaced.
I mean, he hires dumb guys like you to work for him. When it comes time to pay off, he takes a powder.
Unpaid and a little tipsy, with all their money in the world being $250, they go to some cheap beds Dobbs knows about, and find our third protagonist as he's yapping about gold. And when I say yapping, I mean yapping. Say hello to Howard. He talks quickly, enthusiastically, and doesn't stop for more than 3 seconds at a time. And not so much about gold itself, but the labour, the process that surrounds it. Even disregarding what he's saying, his old age and the clear reverence in his voice when speaking tells you all you need to know about Howard's passion and experience in prospecting. Howard talking loudly about how much money there is in gold naturally gets the attention of Dobbs. Howard says that the work is usually grueling and unrewarding, but when you get a good spot there'll always be more to find, and you'll never be able to stop. Not even the threat of miserable death could stop you from turning the roulette wheel. Dobbs interjects, swearing that he'd stop after getting what he started for, no matter how much was left. But the film cuts to a close-up of Howard as he gets more serious, and he says he knows what gold does to a man's soul. Everything about this scene is beautiful. First and foremost, it's an excellent introduction to Howard as a character, but the way our other two protagonists react to what he's saying demonstrates their characters as well. Dobbs is lured into the conversation by the talks of wealth, whilst Curtin is in the background getting ready, listening, but not giving it his full attention, and only saying a few words at the end which are little more than a snarky comment. Once the conversation is over, we fade to a few days later, and Dobbs is still thinking about gold, specifically about what Howard said about how it changes someone. He asks Curtin what he thinks of it. Curtin simply says he supposes it depends on the man, and Dobbs concurs, saying gold doesn't carry any curses, it's just about if the right guy finds it. Just like last night, Curtin is listening, but the camera pays very little attention to him, and it's clear he's looking at something else. This scene and the following conversation acts as a lightning rod for the story's core theme. But let's put a pin in that for now, because Curtin sees something important.
Is that Pat McCormick, or am I seeing things?
Now seems like a good time to bring up how names are used in the movie, because for a while, they aren't. No one ever says, "Hi, I'm X." Everyone learns each other's names off screen, and they don't come up in conversation, so we the audience don't know what to call any of these people until 10 minutes in, which is unusual, but it works because instead of identifying them by what word was assigned to them, our first thoughts are of their looks, actions and personality, their actual character. The first name we hear is 10 minutes in, and it's Pat McCormick. This is after we've already spent some time with the guy, and it's repeated a few times to really drill it into our heads.
Pat McCormick.
So that when Curtin asks Dobbs,
Is that Pat McCormick, or am I seeing things?
we know who he's talking about. Shortly after this we learn Dobbs' name, sort of. Curtin calls him Dobbsy, a nickname signifying how close they've gotten. Some people might not catch this on first watch, since we don't know his name yet, but adding Z at the end of the name is a common enough nickname that I'm sure some people caught it, and if not there's always a rewatch. Then in this scene names are relevant again. Dobbs and Curtin just called Howard an old man because that's all they know him as. Dobbs has held on to what he said, but he doesn't have much interest in the guy who actually said it. And then, when these two see Pat McCormick, they approach him, and he acts all friendly, introducing them to, let's call her his girlfriend. He remembers their names, trying to be friendly, but forgets his girlfriend's name because he's a bit of a scumbag in case you couldn't tell. Dobbs and Curtin demand their money, so Pat leads them into a bar for a drink, trying to dance around the issue. He orders a bottle, and when it's clear he can't talk his way out, smashes it into Curtin's face before sucker punching Dobbs. So far McCormick's main gimmick is his sharp tongue, but he's also a pretty big guy, performed by Barton McLean, who played numerous tough guy roles in crime films, so it's no surprise with the element of surprise he almost beats up both the two, but when they're on the ground, instead of charging towards them, he just walks. Dobbs and Curtin are giving it all they have and more, but McCormick doesn't seem to take it seriously until it's too late. Put a pin in that. Once McCormick's on the ground, he hands over his wallet to Dobbs, who takes the money he owes him and throws the rest on his face. Dobbs goes over to the bartender and pays him for the drinks and damages, before skedaddling with Curtin. Now, on my first and second watch I thought that Dobbs could have stolen all of Pat's money, but didn't because he's not a greedy person. He just wants what they've earned. I think there's some truth in this, and that's definitely what you're supposed to think on the first viewing, but let's put a pin in that. Later, as the duo are washing up in a fountain, Dobbs still hasn't gotten gold out of his head, and pitches to Curtin the idea of them becoming prospectors, speaking as if he's got it all figured out. Although when asked if he knows how much the equipment costs, he says no, and when asked if he knows what gold looks like in the ground, he again says no. Curtin is open to the idea, but unlike Dobbs, he's aware of their shortcomings, and suggests Howard, who they call the old man since they still don't know his name, can probably fill them in. Dobbs thinks he could give a few pointers, but tries to shut down the idea of taking him with him, believing he's too old. Although Curtin tells him some old-timers can be surprisingly tough, and that they could have real use for someone so experienced. Dobbs is pretty easily convinced, and they go hunt him up right away. This scene encapsulates all of Dobbs' flaws. He's arrogant, short-sighted, and lets his imagination run away with him. Meanwhile, Curtin is the opposite of that. Of the soon-to-be trio, Curtin is definitely the quietest, and I don't just mean that literally. Look at how everyone's introduced. Dobbs is the sole main character for the first few scenes, Howard gets a few minutes focused on just his talking, with his words engraving themselves into Dobbs' mind, and Curtin was some guy Dobbs talked to on a bench, and when I say two, I mean two. There was very little back and forth, and that sets the stage for his character going forward, because up until this point he's mostly existed in the background, just listening to others. His character feels like it was constructed around mirroring Dobbs, which makes for an interesting matchup as we'll see how their different personalities react to upcoming events. But despite their differences, they both come from similar backgrounds, which is where Howard comes in, who's completely different in both personality and background. Returning to the cheap beds, the two ask Howard if he'll go with them, and he says he's just been waiting for someone to ask, though with more words than he probably needed.
Will I go? What a question. Of course I'll go. Any time, any day. I'm waiting for one of you guys to ask me. Out for gold? Always at your service.
He asks back how much the two have to invest, as they'll need $600 minimum for all the necessary tools, weapons and provisions. Dobbs is curious about the weapons, and Howard answers meat and bandits, as they'd be going to bandit country, informing both the characters and audience this adventure might be more dangerous than expected, but this old man is ready for it. More subtly though, this little line tells us that Howard's resourceful, knowing how to hunt his own food instead of buying all of it, and later on we see the trio use hides from the animals they killed to disguise themselves as hunters, as prospecting attracts all the wrong attention. Back to the $600, Dobbs and Curtin have $300 between them, while Howard can pitch in $200, meaning they don't have enough. But notice how I said Dobbs and Curtin have $300, whilst Howard can pitch in $200, because Howard actually has $300, meaning they do have enough, but he wants to hold on to something in case things go south, contrary to Dobbs and Curtin who are going for all or nothing, which again speaks to his experience. As to Curtin and Dobbs, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but to Howard it's a day job. So the three still need 100 pesos, but luckily for the protagonists, they're the protagonists! So the boy from the start arrives and reveals to Dobbs that he won 200 pesos in the lottery. Dobbs is ecstatic. He gives the kid some money, how generous, and asks Curtin if he wants to shake the hand that bought the ticket, saying he'll cover the rest. Curtin congratulates Dobbs but asks why he's filling in for him, which is a bit of an odd question given Dobbs and Howard still need him to make up the full $600, but I guess he's just a little uncomfortable paying the least amount of money. But Dobbs reassures him the difference doesn't matter and tells him again to shake his hand, and calls him partner. Put a pin in that. Meanwhile, look at Howard's reaction. The most cheery and talkative person in the room is completely blank upon hearing of Dobbs' win, likely because the prospect of setting out with these two is setting in, and their inexperienced optimism reminds him of previous adventures which turned sour. And cutting to his reaction keeps the audience grounded. This is a time for celebration but also caution, as they're about to embark on a dangerous campaign, which is perfectly transmitted by the characters' varied reactions. Alright, let's step back for a minute. As the film goes on, these characters are going to change, but right now they're about the same as they were at the start, so let's mark our progress and see what we've learned. Dobbs is the character we know the most about. He's fallen under hard times but does everything he can to protect his pride. He's arrogant, aggressive and short-sighted, but also fair, hard-working, generous and loyal. I've highlighted his flaws a lot, but in the film itself they're largely overshadowed by his better qualities, and are pretty forgivable under the circumstances. In contrast, Curtin is the character we know the least about, but it also seems like there isn't much to learn. He's quiet and passive, going entire scenes without talking, leaving that up to Dobbs. There are two scenes where he's active. The first is when he and Dobbs are shaking down Paddy McCormick.
We want what's coming to us, and we want it right here and now.
But didn't I just get through telling you that?
Better come across, Pat.
He speaks confidently, directly, and a lot more than we'd seen so far. So it's not like he's shy or anything, he just doesn't have much to say. This scene also shows he's good at confrontation.
The next week, huh?
Nothing doing right here and now. Every cent you owe us or you won't walk out of here. You'll have to be carried out.
Which might be useful later. The second is when he and Dobbs discuss becoming prospectors, and for the first time he pushes back on what Dobbs is saying, not in an argumentative way, in a let's slow down and think about this way. Another little moment I really like is when Dobbs wins the lottery. Curtin is checking the ticket himself, and is excited for Dobbs. And this is before he knows he has anything to gain from it, so he's just happy for his friend. Put a pin in that. Finally there's Howard. He's an old kook who loves what he does, and loves talking about it even more. And you love listening to it, because there's a certain rhythm to his dialogue and delivery. All of the characters speak in very distinctive ways, but Walt Huston stands as the tallest giant with his speeches. I could listen to this man read the phone book, let alone this holy grail of a screenplay. Brilliant babbling aside, his character is a beacon of positivity, and his experience allows him to actually know what he's doing. Consequently, it also gives him an air of cynicism, which doesn't keep him down, but does act as an ominous warning which the other characters not only ignore, but argue against. So that's everyone right now. Let's see what changes as they enter a very different environment that only one of them is prepared for. The film fades and our humble threesome are aboard a train. Howard spouting information useless to the audience whilst the camera is positioned behind his head, ignoring his probably lively facial expressions in favour of Curtin listening and Dobbs asleep. This shot holds for 15 seconds, not quite long enough to bore the audience, but enough for a mundanity to set in, which is then thrown out the window by sudden screeches, crashes and the distinctive sound of a ricocheting bullet. We see one guy come out from behind a tree, their distance from the camera makes them look tiny, but then another comes out, and the film cuts to a whole group of men, 3 on horseback, all shooting at the train. Our American heroes get their guns out and fire back. This action isn't particularly interesting, by today's standards at least, but look at the characters' faces. Howard and Curtin are serious, but Dobbs looks like he's enjoying himself. They get out unscathed, and as everyone winds down, Dobbs brags about how many people he shot, asking the other two how many they got to make sure he got more, before pointing out a bullet hole saying he was this close to dying, and that he would have gotten the one with the golden hat too if it weren't for an unlucky train jolt. This probably wouldn't be my reaction just after ending the lives of several human beings and almost having my own cut short, but to each their own. He's interrupted by a guy who explains the situation to the three. There was a big boulder on the track forcing them to stop, but the bandits got a surprise because there were soldiers waiting on a train, and not many passengers got killed. This scene doesn't really give us any new information, but it demonstrates the threat the bandits alluded to earlier. These people are coordinated enough to ambush a train, and their attacks are common enough occurrences that measures have to be put in place to stop them. Furthermore, this wasn't just a handful of people, it was a full-blown operation our heroes wouldn't stand a chance against on their own. On a lighter note, Howard jumps right back into the plan and tells them a funny story about a guy he used to know, which is a nice way of bridging the gap between what I imagine was a very tense scene in the 1940s and the next where the trio are renting mules. This next scene really takes its time and slows the film down, which is important because this will come back later, and actions this dull need to have a decent bit of time and focus to be memorable, especially in a film like this where they throw so much at you at once and expect you to remember all of it because it will probably come back later. Sometimes in small ways, like in little character interactions.
He's too old to take along with us, of course. We'd have to pack him on our backs.
Remember what you said back in Tampico about having to pack that old man on our backs?
Sometimes in not so small ways. This is where my cinematography example from the start came from. As the characters are loading up their burrows, the camera makes no attempt to amplify the dramatic weight of what's happening. It's just showing events as they occur as best it can. Dobbs puts on his saddle, a kid comes up, says he's doing it wrong, fixes it, Dobbs smiles at his mistake and continues. Meanwhile, the music... I suppose this is their way of giving the moment some gravity and getting the audience hyped up, without compromising the film's hands-off style where the cinematography takes a back seat. Which is not to say the film looks basic, it's very deliberate in how it frames things and who and what it focuses on. And aesthetically it's still really good, you just wouldn't see it in a pretty short compilation. Back to the scene at hand, it's also appropriate for the film to slow down here because in spite of our main characters just almost having their brains blown out, this is the calm before the storm. From here on out, our heroes will be travelling through the wilderness without the shield of civilization, and only themselves to help. Finally, the trio properly sets out, and we see them traverse the desert, the jungle, and a sandstorm. In the moment, these scenes showcase Dobbs and Curtin's inexperience as they struggle to traverse the environment. Meanwhile, Howard is shown fully capable, strolling through the wilderness without needing to drink as much as the others, educating Dobbs and Curtin when they make a mistake, and at night, when the two are exhausted, he does whatever this is.
Hey, you fellas, how about some beans? You want some beans? Going through some mighty rough country tomorrow, you better have some beans.
All while maintaining a cheerful demeanour. These scenes also lay a lot of groundwork. Every place they go is somewhere they'll have to come back through on their return, and every interaction sets up or foreshadows a future event. In particular, Dobbs and Curtin find pyrite, mistake it for gold, and waste water revealing it, prompting Howard to correct them and say, "Sometimes water is more precious than gold," which all sets up various things that we'll get back to later, so I put several pins in that. They arrive somewhere, and Howard checks the ground as the dynamic duo trudge along and claps behind him. This shot holds for 13 seconds. Dobbs then suggests they give up, which is a bit of whiplash since we've only seen one night, so for all the audience knows it's just been a day in universe and 5 minutes out.
I'm thinking we ought to give up. Leave the whole outfit. Everything behind and go back to civilization.
It didn't take you long to give up.
However, you can infer it's been longer and plainly see how much of a toll it's taking on them, so it's not that big of a deal. I don't point it out every time because the film does it a lot, but it is not afraid to put down the cutting scissors. The longest shot thus far has been Dobbs and Curtin's talk by the fountain, which is all one continuous take, trusting the lines and performances to immerse the audience. And they did. I didn't even realise it was one take till later. So this here isn't even that long, but because there's very little action it feels longer. Howard is doing a menial task with no clear sense of progression, whilst Dobbs and Curtin suffer helplessly. This is the film giving us all the information we need in a single shot, and holding on it long enough for it to sink in. And if you imagine this has been happening all day, for multiple days, you can see why Dobbs might want to throw in the towel. But Howard just makes fun of him and Curtin. A lot.
I got two very elegant dead fellows who kick at the first drop of rain and hide in the closet from thunder rumbles. My. Two shoe clerks reading the magazine about prospecting for gold in the land of the midnight sun, south of the border or west of the Rockies.
So much that Dobbs tries to bash his head in with a rock. And he keeps going.
You're so dumb there's nothing to compare you with. You're dumber than the dumbest jackass. Look at each other, will you? Do you ever see anything like yourself for being dumb specimens?
The prospect of going back now, right now, or even having his head caved in is so hilarious that Howard can't contain himself. And to his credit, it is pretty funny, because Howard just found traces of gold. Triumphant music kicks in, then fades with the film into a more peaceful tune as Howard gently sways his pan, revealing unrefined gold. So firstly, it's clear Dobbs and Curtin wouldn't have had a hope in hell of recognising this, as it looks nothing like how they expected, comparing it to sand. Secondly, Howard says they shouldn't get a claim and pretend to be hunters to stay under the radar. Some time passes and Dobbs is doing much better. He's smiling, joking, and performing a task with a clear end goal. On top of that, now he knows more about gold, has seen and touched it, there's a tangible motivation for his actions. Also, he seems to have gotten closer with Howard, which is pretty good all things considered. Curtin turns on the contraption they're working on, and just based on the visuals, this seems pretty cool, doesn't it? Now let's turn on the music. I'm mixed on this. On one hand, this feels incredibly jarring since the characters are just doing what they were earlier,
The tanks are leak summit first till the boards begin to swell and close the seam.
and they haven't undergone any negative changes. Hell, this is the most positive interaction Dobbs and Howard have ever had. But on the other, there is one general change. Gold is no longer a dream, it's something within their grasp. And although they haven't undergone a change yet, this is going to cause a shift we'll see immediately in the next scene. So I wouldn't change this if I could, but I don't unconditionally love it. Speaking of unconditionally loving a scene, it's nighttime and Howard's measuring how much gold they have. Curtin asks what he thinks it's worth, and Howard estimates about $5,000, or about $89,000 today. Dobbs lays down and while staring at the roof asks when they'll be dividing it up. Howard gives him a strange look, then says any time he wants. But Curtin questions why divide the gold up at all. Why not wait till they've sold it then split the money? Howard says he's okay with whatever they decide. Dobbs, still not making eye contact, groans and says he's up for dividing it as they go along, making them each responsible for their own goods. Alright, pause. So did you catch how Dobbs phrased his first question? He asked when they divide it, not if, treating it like something that's going to happen, even though they clearly haven't talked about it. Then, when Curtin pushes back on the idea, he says, I'm up for, which is pretty casual for something he evidently wants quite a lot. Meanwhile, Howard seemed uncomfortable with the question, and tries to remove himself from the conversation, looking down and focusing on his task, like he's trying to avoid conflict. You can imagine he's been here before and he didn't care for the outcome. Howard says he's fine dividing it up, adding he wouldn't want the responsibility of guarding someone else's treasure anyway. Here he's agreeing with Dobbs, repeating and validating his own words, but Dobbs still takes it the wrong way and asks who asked him to, which Howard laughs off saying no one. But then he supposes he's the most trustworthy of the crew, to which Dobbs gets up and asks why he thinks that. Howard says he said the most trustworthy, not the most honest, which confuses Dobbs. Howard goes on to explain that because of his youth and because he's gotten stronger, if Dobbs wanted to make off with the gold as Curtin's on a supply run, Howard wouldn't be able to catch him, which Dobbs seems offended by. The camera cuts to Curtin, who asks Howard about himself, and he says if he tried a stunt like that, he'd easily be caught up with. Curtin agrees with his logic, but says that maybe they should split it up, to relieve Howard of a responsibility he doesn't like. Dobbs looks back at the roof, and Howard agrees. So what's happening here is now that the money's starting to pile up, Dobbs is getting territorial. Howard notices this and tries to avoid the topic, but later he claims to be the most trustworthy of the group. Well, not exactly. He says it casually and non-definitively, but it's what he means, and Dobbs knows it. So it's an odd choice to say that if you don't want to step on any toes. But when Dobbs predictably takes it the wrong way, Howard de-escalates things with a joke before explaining himself. And within that explanation, he props up Dobbs
You fellas are a lot tougher than when we started out.
and lowers himself.
Oh, I'm not quick on my feet any longer, and I won't be able to run half as fast as either of you. You'd get me by the collar and string me up in no time.
Dobbs still gets butthurt, but he doesn't get sent over the top, and they still agree to divide the loot. But I don't think stopping that was Howard's goal. I think he wanted to make it clear he's not a threat to Dobbs. Dobbs is young-ish, much stronger and faster than this unserious, perpetually happy old man. Which isn't to say Howard is planning 5 steps ahead with every sentence, and he's not the type to jump to conclusions. But he has his suspicions, and is certainly more aware of what's happening than Curtin, who is the one person in the conversation to consistently look at the others, doesn't have any subtext in his lines, and is mostly ignored by the camera. Except maybe his last one. I don't believe he's just doing this for Howard's benefit. I can believe that he believes that, but even if it's just subconsciously, I think all this talk's got him nervous. Either way, it's happening, and Howard starts dividing up. The ringing sound of the gold dust pouring feels like something out of a fairy tale, but it's played over low horns that give it an unnerving feel. All as the film switches from close-up to close-up of the characters' faces, and the gold. Dobbs and Curtin are transfixed, and Howard takes notice. Funny how Dobbs doesn't keep looking at Howard when they were talking, but here his eyes never leave the gold as it's being moved. For my money, this is the best scene so far. Fade to the trio working in the daytime. Dobbs is hacking away at a wall when the ceiling caves in on him. Curtin rushes over and calls out to him. No answer. Curtin's eyes drift and he turns his back, intent on leaving Dobbs to die. That's one less person to split the gold between. But no, obviously he quickly comes to his senses and goes back, yelling Dobbs' name again, pulling him from the rubble, and calling for Howard to come help. As Howard looks at Dobbs, Curtin leans back. Dobbs wakes up dazed, and Curtin tells him what happened, although he doesn't mention how he fished him out. Howard does, after Dobbs has to ask who did it. Dobbs tells Curtin he owes him his life, and Curtin tells him to forget it, unsettled that he hesitated. I don't think anyone's surprised Dobbs survived this, or that Curtin came back to get him, but the fact he even considered leaving him is. Firstly, Curtin has been pretty much perfect this whole time. The closest thing we have to negativity between him and the others is when Dobbs tripped over his foot just before they met. Secondly, this is pretty out of the blue. We saw Curtin stare at the gold in the last scene, but that's it. So this isn't the payoff to something. It's a setup. Maybe this experience scared him straight and something like this will happen again, but then he won't turn away. Or this is the first step in a gradual decline. But even beyond Curtin, this is a bad sign for the state of the others. Curtin had some edges, even if it was more subtle. Still, he's probably the best of the group. It's not clear how much time passes between scenes, but it's fair to assume we're still in the early days, and if Curtin can be pushed this far, this early, that doesn't bode well for the others later on. Especially the guy who was already acting suspicious, tried to cave his partner's skull in before they even got here, and has just now sustained a head injury. But no need to put a pin in that, I'm sure it's fine. In the next scene, the crew dishes out the dust after a hard day's work. Dobbs looks at the others before going to hide his share whilst they hang around. Curtin asks Howard what he's going to do with his money, which considering the last scene is somewhat reassuring. He's asking a personal question concerning the future of someone else, and generally seems to be friendly, indicating he doesn't want to kill them and steal their gold, which is nice. Howard says he's only getting older and doesn't want to do any more prospecting, so he'll open up a shop and spend most of his time reading comics and adventure stories, which is just perfect for him. He wants to keep working even though he doesn't need to because he enjoys keeping on his feet. It'll be work, but it'll be easier than prospecting. And when he slows down even more, he could just hire people to help out. It will be his own store, so he wouldn't need to deal with higher-ups, which is great because he doesn't seem to care for authorities. It'll be a very sociable job, interacting with people all day, which would naturally appeal to someone so talkative who's presumably spent most of his life around not so many people. Then there's the comics and adventure stories which would let him experience things he's too old to live out. Howard asks Curtin what he's going to do, and Curtin says he'll buy some land and grow fruit, which isn't something I would have guessed, but Curtin recounts a story from when he was a kid, with a big smile on his face as nostalgic music plays in the background. He describes hundreds of people, old and young, whole families all working together. Then afterwards they'd sing songs and party. From this we see how much value he puts in community and other people's happiness. As a charming contrast to that, Dobbs walks back just as Curtin's finishing up and talking about what it's like watching your peaches grow, and asks what that's all about, trivialising it. The fact Dobbs separated from the group and was busy hiding his gold as the others were having a friendly chat shouldn't be overlooked, as it rather blatantly represents the rift forming between them. Howard says they're talking about what they'll do with their money, and Dobbs jumps right in, saying he's got it all figured out, immediately making the conversation about him. Howard and Curtin were done anyway, but he wasn't here and couldn't have known that. But hey ho. Curtin asks Dobbs to tell them all about his plan, and Dobbs explains. First, he's going to get a Turkish bath. Then, he's going to go to a shop and buy a bunch of fancy clothes. And then, he's going to go to a restaurant and order everything on the menu. And if it's not all perfect, or even if it is, he'll send everything back. Which makes sense for him. These are all short-term goals and largely revolve around his ego. He wants to look good and feel big. That last one though, that's making himself feel big by making others feel small. Benefit of the doubt, this might be bluffing, but I wouldn't put it past him. Curtin asks what he'd do next, and Dobbs quietly smiles, implying he'd go see a lady of the night, which doesn't help his case but gets him and Curtin thinking about women, so they both stare at nothing in particular until Howard interrupts and says not to even think about women because it's not good for their health. And Dobbs agrees, as it'll be a while before they see any, which gets Howard talking about a deadline for when they're done, saying 25,000 each should do it, but Dobbs says that's small potatoes, which is a weird way of describing 445 grand in today's money, suggesting at least 50,000, and 75 would be better. Howard says that it would take at least a year and the vein would need to hold out. Dobbs doesn't think a year sounds so bad considering what they had to gain, and completely ignores the second point. Howard says 25 would last him his whole life, but Dobbs asks about himself. He's young-ish, he needs dough and plenty of it. And based on their plans, he's not wrong. Unlike the others who intend to invest their money into businesses and keep working, Dobbs just wants to spend. Curtin chimes in saying 25,000 is more than enough for him, but Dobbs just repeats, small potatoes. And Curtin says there's no use making hogs of themselves, which cuts surprisingly deep. Dobbs brings up that he put up the lion's share, so he would be within his rights to get more than the others, if he wanted, which he specifies that he doesn't. But he thinks he could if he wanted to, and make sure they know it, telling Curtin to remember that the next time he calls him a hog, which is a far cry from what he said at the start. It's also very funny that he feels like Curtin owes him anything when he saved his life in the last scene, but Curtin doesn't bring that up because he's not an arsehole who would hold something like that over someone. Next comes my favourite little interaction in the film. Curtin gets up, hands Dobbs what he owes him, plus interest, and Dobbs takes it and tosses it out. I love this movie. He was never going to just accept it because he doesn't actually care about the money. That tiny amount isn't even on his radar. He cares about the thrill, the power trip of being owed by the others. To feel like he's holding the sword of Damocles above their heads, and if he were any other person, he would drop it. But because he's so benevolent, he won't. But he could if he wanted to, so watch your step and leave him alone. He brought up that he was the biggest investor pretty quick, so I imagine this is something he's thought about for a while, waiting for an opportunity to bring it up. But now he's been paid back, he no longer has it. He's their equal. And he doesn't like this, so he tries to pull what he must have thought was a really cool power move and threw it away like a child, acting like he doesn't care. He could have given it back, but going back after all this bluster might make him look weak. And even if he doesn't want it, he doesn't want Curtin to have it either. So he tosses out what must have been at least half a day's work, and does more harm than good with his relationship to others. The scene ends with Dobbs saying he just doesn't like being called a hog, which, yeah, we'll come back to that. This scene was an opportunity to have a heart-to-heart with the others, and get closer like Howard and Curtin did. But instead, he did this. From a characterization standpoint, this scene is flawless, and the cinematography and editing aren't slouching either. When Howard brings up the idea of setting an end goal, the three are all in the frame together. But when Dobbs keeps pushing back and gets more argumentative with Howard, it switches to focus more on the two of them, and you get a closer look at Dobbs and a better look at his face and body language. The camera cuts to solely Curtin as he chips in, putting more weight on what he's saying, which pays off when he drops the hogs line. Then the camera cuts to solely Dobbs, the flickering from the fire more pronounced on him as he gets angry and leans in. Just a wonderful scene all round, and for my money, it's the best so far. Continuing the vein of bad blood, the next scene is stained with mistrust as Dobbs wakes up in the middle of the night, notices Howard missing, and goes to find him. When he does, he makes him jump and they aim their guns at each other. Howard is aiming his gun at Dobbs because he was spooked, but Dobbs has no real reason to hold his up. Howard warns him to be careful because he almost shot him, and explains he was just checking the burrows. Dobbs doesn't believe him and says he'll go see for himself. However, he instead goes to check on his gold stash, which is hidden in the same direction Howard was walking from. When Howard gets back, he wakes Curtin, who notices Dobbs gone, gets suspicious, and goes to check on his own stash. Dobbs comes back, notices Curtin's gone, and you'll never guess what. He gets suspicious and goes to find him, but Curtin comes back, from a different direction to his treasure, so they both sit down, although they both keep hold of their guns. Howard, seeing what they're doing and sick of it, tells them to stop worrying about their goods and go to bed. They've got work in the morning. Dobbs and Curtin lay their guns down and lay back, but keep an eye on each other the whole time. This little scene shows how much their relationship has broken down, the growing division and mistrust among the group, but that it isn't spread out equally. Dobbs has a moment of mistrust with both Curtin and Howard, but Curtin only has one, with Dobbs, and Howard doesn't have any at all, possibly hinting at sides forming. The scene also shows us where Dobbs' hiding place is, which I tell you to put a pin in, but this movie is such a rich tapestry of cause and effect, this was probably a bad idea, so just keep it in mind, it'll be useful in a moment. Dobbs is muttering angrily to himself as he prepares to go on a supply run to the village, which he's annoyed about because he feels like he's being ordered around. We don't see the lead up to this, but based on his temperament, he's probably making a big deal about nothing. Howard approaches and asks why he's talking to himself, and Dobbs asks who else he can talk to, lamenting about how he can't talk to him or Curtin, saying, "What fine partners you turned out to be," which is funny because he's the one who pushed Curtin away, and is currently pushing Howard away despite him trying to be friendly, so Dobbs is just deflecting and blaming his problems on others. Howard tells him if he's got a problem he should get out of his system, prompting Dobbs to accuse him of conspiring with Curtin to try and find his hiding spot when he's gone, which is a bit of an escalation. This is already ridiculous and very crisp projection, but he keeps going. Howard says if he's so worried about his gold he should take it with him, but Dobbs says bandits might steal it, because bags of sand attract so much attention. Howard points out it wouldn't make a difference as bandits would kill him for the shoes on his feet, which makes Dobbs think that's what he wants, for the bandits to kill him, which is ridiculous because if that were the case, why would Howard suggest he take his gold? Why not just kill him in his sleep? Dobbs' reasoning is full of holes, and that's before you even consider who he's talking to. He's completely paranoid in letting himself be taken away by his imagination. Seeing this, Howard laughs and tells him to forget about it, which is probably the best move. Curtin goes to town instead, and as he's going, he sees a Gila monster go under a rock. He gets a branch to pry it open, but Dobbs is standing by. I love this shot. The guy we care for is just going about his business as a gun peeks into frame. And boom, the guy with a declining mental state is there, aiming a gun at him. And we don't immediately see Dobbs' face, so it feels much less personal. And his body is much bigger in the frame than Curtin, so he feels more imposing. And because they're so out in the open with only a little piece of wood between them, Curtin feels really exposed. It's just great. I'll talk more about how this scene is shot in a second. Curtin is naturally confused, and Dobbs doesn't even try to explain, but he quickly deduces that he accidentally stumbled upon Dobbs' stash. Curtin seems worried at first, but after he's figured it out, regains his confidence, even calling Dobbs Dobbsy, making light of the situation. But Dobbs isn't so easily swayed. Howard arrives and casually asks what the trouble is. Note how he doesn't have his gun drawn. He's here to defuse the situation. Curtin explains what happened and Dobbs doesn't believe him, so Curtin tells him to put his hand under the rock and pull his treasure out. Dobbs goes to do it cautiously as Curtin eggs him on. Just before he puts his hand in though, Curtin loudly asks Howard about the lizards, and goes on about how bad they are, which Dobbs doesn't appreciate, but it ends up saving his life. Curtin calls him a coward, and Dobbs says he'll kill him, and charges at him. If he really wanted to, he'd shoot him, but he doesn't, so he didn't, and gets grappled and disarmed by the two of them. Howard turns the rock over, revealing the lizard on Dobbs' stash. Curtin shoots it, and Dobbs sits down silently. A lot is probably going through Dobbs' head right now. He almost died here, but if Curtin hadn't spotted the lizard, he would have died trying to hide his gold, and he almost killed Curtin for saving him. What's more, this thoroughly debunks his paranoid worries about being betrayed. His gold was out in the open, the others had their guns on him, he was completely defenseless, and even if he was wrong about them, it's not like they didn't have good cause. He might very well have executed Curtin then and there over a simple misunderstanding. He demonstrated that he's unstable and dangerous, but they saved his life and later appear to not even have retaliated. Cinematography time! Keep an eye on the levels here. When he has his gun on him, Dobbs is much taller than Curtin, showing the power disparity, but then Howard turns up and he's taller than both of them. His presence marks a shift in the power dynamic because although Dobbs still has the power over Curtin, he can't just shoot him without good reason, and you know Howard's going to take Curtin's side. Howard's arrival also boxes Dobbs in, an idea repeated in a shot where Dobbs gets on the ground. When Dobbs was revealed, him being the foreground accentuated his power, but this shot flips it on its head. Dobbs feels isolated as the others loom in the background, and a close-up of Dobbs' face just bashes you over the head with how good an actor Humphrey Bogart is. Brilliant. I haven't talked about this scene as much as some of the more dialogue-heavy ones, but it's yet another highlight in this already stacked film. This is also the cap to a sequence built around Dobbs' hiding place. Around the campfire, we saw Dobbs prioritise hiding his gold over talking with the others. Then we got to see him worrying about the others trying to find it, and then he assumes the others are plotting together behind his back, escalating with every scene until we arrive here. We fade to Curtin arriving in a local village, where he sees a crowd of people gathered around captured bandits. A man in the crowd notices him and strikes up a very one-sided conversation. Meet Cody, the honorary fourth protagonist. Cody goes on a while about the bandits and how the federales are really good at their jobs and can track them down, as Curtin gets on with his business. Cody is trying to be friendly, but Curtin isn't very receptive, so he cuts to the chase, and asks Curtin his profession. Curtin says hunter. Cody asks if he's seen any gold in the mountains. Curtin obviously says no, and Cody tells him he knows there's some there, and asks if he wants to see if they can find it together. Curtin says there ain't no gold and there never was, and leaves. Cody pushes it further, but Curtin just goes, and Cody watches him leave with a suspicious look on his face. This scene does a good job of introducing Cody. He seems nice, knowledgeable, confident, and clever. And up to this point, the main conflict has been internal, with the bandits mostly being ignored. But now the film's reminding you they're out there, and introduces a new variable in the form of Cody, who seems cool, but we've seen what kind of ideas even supposedly decent people get when gold's at stake. And if he can find it, then what's stopping others from showing up? Back at camp, Curtin tells the others about Cody, and that he saw him following behind on the way back. Dobbs says when he shows up, they'll kick him out, but Howard interjects, saying they can't do that because he might report them. After all, they don't have a claim, remember? 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 You better remember, I told you to put a pin in it! So Dobbs suggests shooting him, which Howard is also against, proposing he might just be a guy who likes to wander around, and as if they did shoot him, it might be discovered. Dobbs suggests pushing him off a rock, making it look like an accident, but Howard asks who would do the pushing, him? To which Dobbs says they toss for it. Dobbs and Howard are taking two different approaches. Dobbs is aggressive, he sees a problem and wants to solve it as quickly and simply as possible, even if it includes murder, while Howard wants to handle things peacefully, even defending Cody from Dobbs by saying he might just be a wanderer, although this is ridiculous and he knows it, so he adds a more logical argument on top of it. Throughout this, Curtin stays quiet, so exactly what he's thinking isn't revealed, but we are given hints through his lack of action. He's the only one who's met Cody and we don't know exactly what he told the others, but he came off as friendly in their interaction. He even asked to be his partner, in an adventure he was sure would find riches. Yet when Dobbs suggests stopping him and discussing how to do it, he doesn't even react. I don't draw any conclusions from this yet, but keep it in mind. Back to the discussion, when Howard asks Dobbs who would do the pushing, he's really asking if Dobbs is willing to do it, and instead of saying yes or no, he says they'd flip a coin, harkening back to the scene in the tent where he has an idea and acts as though the others would just agree with it. But more importantly, it potentially pushes the responsibility of executing his idea onto someone else, which is a little odd he'd feel the need to do that after all his bluster, but a spur-of-the-moment decision built on months of resentment is far different to premeditated murder. Dobbs asks Curtin if he's sure Cody was trailing him. Curtin says absolutely, because there he is. The music stops and the camera cuts to Cody in the distance, arriving with his burrow. Not much happens for a moment, until Dobbs gets up and tells Cody to come closer to the fire, and he complies. The start of this interaction is very slow, as no one, not even Cody, seems to know what to say. None of the options laid out by Dobbs are favourable, and assuming Howard has a plan for taking care of this peacefully, Cody has proven himself bullheaded enough that it probably won't work. Then there's Cody's perspective. If he makes one wrong move, he could be killed, and he knows it. So everyone in this situation is stuck between a rock and a hard place, including the audience. Because Cody seems like a decent chap, and I don't know about you, but I'd rather the characters I've been rooting for not kill an innocent dude in cold blood. And the fairly long stretches of nothing much happening gives time for anticipation to build up, and puts more emphasis on what the characters say when they finally speak. Cody says he knows they don't want him there, but he couldn't resist the opportunity to talk to an American. Dobbs cuts in telling him to go somewhere else like a club, and Cody says he had something else in mind. Something more important. Sending Dobbs into a tirade where he says they don't want them there, but he speaks quickly and with more words than he needs to.
I'm not after that. I've got other things on my mind more important.
So, don't you make any mistakes. Our biggest worry right now is your presence here. We got no use for you. We don't even want you for a cook or a dishwasher. We're full up. No vacancies, understand? In case I don't make myself clear, I think you'll be doing yourself a favor by packing up and getting out of here tomorrow morning.
Go back where you came from. Take our blessings with you.
It's almost an inverse of Howard when we met him, where he was going on and on about something he was passionate about because he was in high spirits. Dobbs is saying everything that comes to mind because he's nervous and he wants this guy to get out. Speaking of Howard, he quietly hands Cody a bowl so he can eat. Again, showing his and Dobbs' difference in approach. It's like poetry sort of, they rhyme. This puts a damper on Dobbs, but he tries to maintain his momentum and keeps going, and Cody just ignores him. In contrast, he looked surprised at Howard offering the bowl, and thanked him, so this approach seems to be more effective. Dobbs gives a very subtle wink to Curtin before mentioning he got a lion while Curtin was away, to keep up the act of a hunter. Curtin asks a follow-up question to try and cement it, all while sounding genuine enough. But Dobbs speaks with some intensity, and from the way this is cut, it looks like he was looking at Cody the whole time. So points for effort, but he's not fooling anyone, and Cody tells him there's no decent game around, and any decent hunter would clear out this whole area in no time. Howard tries to make a smooth recovery, saying they know, it took them a while to realise, but he's right. It's bad ground and they'll be moving on soon. Now if this was Dobbs, he probably would have tried arguing with Cody, but Howard is polite and goes along with it, even telling him he's right, validating what he said and by extension him, to sweeten him up. But Cody has none of it and latches onto the comment about bad ground, and says for game, yes, but not for other things. Howard asks what, and Cody says, gold. Now Howard switches gears and does argue against Cody. Him and Curtin try to push back while Dobbs quietly stands up. Howard and Curtin, knowing they can't persuade him to leave, turn in for the night, while Dobbs stays back just looking over him, thinking what to do until Cody stands up and goes back to his burrow. In the tent, Curtin says he can't tell if he knows it or not, and Howard says he looks fairly harmless, though admits looks can be deceiving. Dobbs enters and mentions he might try to kill him in their sleep, and Howard says they'll stay up in shifts. We're treated to this lovely fade transition from inside the tent at night to outside in the day. Aside from looking sick as hell, John Huston really cooked with this one. Depending on how pretentious you want to sound, it could also symbolise a shift in perspective. In the last scene we started with the trio, focusing on their reaction as Cody approaches them. But here we start with Cody, as he's approached by the most sane and non-threatening member of the trio, who notices him making coffee with their water and threatens to shoot him if he does it again.
I thought perhaps I was among civilized men who wouldn't begrudge me a little fresh water. Who's not civilized?
Stay classy, Dobbs. In this and the last scene, the characters have been dancing around the issue. They all know what's going on, but what's going on is complicated, so they're pretending not to know as to delay things. But Cody tells them outright he plans to dig for gold, and although he doesn't explicitly call them prospectors or miners or anything like that, it's clear he knows and that he knows they know. So he just says to lay all the cards on the table and discuss their options. He comes up with 3. The first, kill him. The second, run him off. And the third, take him in as a partner. He then goes on to break each down. The first would be the simplest, but what if more people came along? Would they kill all of them? How many people are they willing to kill? Also, who would do the killing? Because the other two would have leverage over them. The only safe way to do it would be to shoot him all at once. The second is easily the worst. He offers no positives and says if they did it, he might inform on them, even mentioning a possible reward which he says is mighty tempting. Curtin says that's a good argument in favour of number 1, and Cody says he doesn't deny it, which is a very strange way of arguing for your life, but he moves on to number 3. He says if they take him on, they won't lose anything. He doesn't want what they already have, only what they stand to get. And with that, he leaves them to decide. It makes sense to be friendly and upfront with the trio, given what he's proposing, but this leads to him disclosing things he really should have kept close to his chest. The way he laid out the second option immediately threw it out, forcing them to choose between 2 extremes, and he told them how to kill him in a way that invalidated one of his reasons not to kill him. With all that in mind, the 3 talk. Dobbs says kill him, his first reason being that he doesn't like getting taken advantage of, highlighting another glaring flaw in Cody's logic, that he expected them to use logic. It doesn't matter how well he gave his argument because Dobbs doesn't engage with it. The only thing he did was tell Dobbs how to kill him, and Dobbs suggests they do it just like that. Howard is against it and tries to push back, but Dobbs asks what happens if more come. Will they invite everyone in? which is actually a good point, one that Howard doesn't try to argue against. He just says to let the majority decide, prompting Curtin to answer. Curtin has been quiet since... always, but especially since he met Cody, so we don't know exactly what's going through his head, but we have been given clues. Curtin thinks for a while, then agrees with Dobbs. The three get into gear and their enthusiasm is shown by how fast they get their guns. Dobbs gets his right out, Curtin follows, and Howard, not even having it on him, goes to retrieve his from the tent. They walk up to Cody, and he knows what they've chosen. Before the trio kill him though, he points at something in the distance. People. A lot of them. Howard guesses they're soldiers, and Dobbs being Dobbs jumps to the conclusion they're with Cody, who corrects them, saying it's bandits, deducing that they heard about a hunter in the village and are coming to steal their ammunition. The trio don't argue and Howard forms a plan. Not 30 seconds ago they were going to shoot Cody, but in the face of something bigger than themselves, they need his help. The next minute is spent building tension, cutting back and forth between the bandits getting closer and the characters preparing for them, played over with foreboding music. Once everything's mostly in order, Howard says they should get something to eat, and again gives Cody food. If they survive this together, Cody's place in the group is secured. When they arrive, Dobbs is the first to engage. The bandits were only told about one hunter, and they don't know what he looks like, so as far as they know, he's alone, and they greatly outnumber him. However, Dobbs is in a better position than them, so if things escalate, he'll probably be able to pick off one or two of them before going down. Furthermore, the whole point of this is to get more ammo, meaning any sort of firefight would be counterproductive. This is an interesting situation for our hero to be in. The villains can absolutely kill him, but sheer awkwardness prevents them from using their full weight, which is good for him because it keeps him alive, but it doesn't present any opportunities for victory either. Wanting to settle this peacefully, the bandits try to convince Dobbs to surrender his gun. But they understand that giving away your only means of defence to the most evil people imaginable. In a book, this confrontation is preceded by the story of a recent train robbery where they killed babies with machetes and women attacked them, not to try and fight back, but because they wanted the suffering to be over. I wonder why this wasn't in the film! Isn't all that appealing. So Goldhat claims they're the mountain police. Dobbs obviously doesn't budge, lines are exchanged about foul-smelling badges, tensions get high, and Dobbs fires a warning shot at Goldhat's gold hat. And he barely flinches. Which is kind of funny. It gives a similar energy to Buster Keaton keeping a straight face as God knows what happens to him. But in this specific context, the last thing you want is for your enemy to not be afraid of death. Goldhat switches his approach. He puts on a happy smile and tries to buy the gun off Dobbs with an expensive watch. Dobbs says no, the bandit loses his cool again, and another warning shot is fired. This time by Howard. Now the bandits know there's no peaceful solution, and more importantly, Dobbs isn't alone, which they find a little intimidating, but also it means multiple guns to steal. The bandits back up, and it almost looks like they're leaving, but they're just getting into a better position to start blasting. There's a short burst of action where both sides fire at each other, and a few bandits go down. Then, quiet. This is exactly what the bandits didn't want to happen, so it looks like they've withdrawn to something else. Dobbs and Curtin crawl to Howard.
Anybody get hurt?
Aw, he does care. But someone's missing. Howard calls over to Cody. And no answer. The trio stay in silence for a moment, until without prompt or discussion, Curtin goes to him, and in doing so exposing himself to gunfire. Despite voting to kill him, or maybe because of that, Curtin risks his life to make sure Cody's okay. Maybe this experience scared him straight and something like this will happen again, but then he won't turn away. And unfortunately, he's not. Curtin takes his gun and ammo, then tells the others he took a bullet through the neck. I love the detail of the film telling us where he was shot. Curtin could have just said he was dead, but that's a particularly brutal end. All Dobbs has to say is that's one less gun. Which, you know what, I'll give him a pass for. They were already vastly outmatched, and now they've lost a quarter of their manpower. This is also the first proper death of the film. We've only known Cody for a few scenes, but those were some pretty long and dense scenes. He was a good, smart guy who the film was setting up for an arc where he earns the others' trust. But now it doesn't matter. He's dead.
But if you close your eyes, does it almost feel like...
And it looks to the others like they're going to follow, as they hear the sound of wood chopping, and Howard figures they're building barricades, which they won't have any way to counter. Just to twist the knife that little bit more, Howard says he'd trade his share for 3 or 4 hand grenades. Luckily for the protagonists, they're the protagonists! And the bandits see soldiers coming and run away. This was set up by the village scene, so I wouldn't call it contrived, but it was very sudden and not an entirely satisfying conclusion. Which is fitting. The three celebrate the bandits being chased off while triumphant music booms, but Howard quickly calms down and directs them to Cody, wondering who he is. This man slept near them last night, ate their food, they wanted to kill him, and he died fighting with them. And they don't even know who he is. The soundtrack shifts to a more somber note as they check his belongings. His name is James Cody, from Dallas, Texas. He has a wife who sent him a letter saying she and their son miss him dearly, and reminds him if he doesn't make a find this time, he said he'll give up prospecting, which he is so happy about because no material treasure is worth the pain of their long separations. So that's a bit of a downer, isn't it? We're learning personal information about him to strengthen our bond, but there's a disconnect because the trio aren't being confided this information by him. They're reading it aloud from a private letter taken off his corpse. This alone is nothing special and pretty tropey, but what stops me from calling it formulaic is the scene earlier, where the trio intended to gun Cody down. Before, as far as they knew, their decision would have only hurt Cody, but here they're showing it would have affected the lives of two other, completely innocent people. Curtin already felt guilty, as evidenced by him going through gunfire, and if he'd known about this he probably would have changed his vote. But now it's too late. But hold on, it gets worse. The letter's not over yet, and goes on to mention how the weather's been lovely, and the fruit trees are all in bloom. Listen to the music here.
The upper orchard looks aflame, and the lower like after a snowstorm.
This track is called Texas Memories, and this is the second time it's played. The first was when Curtin and Howard were chatting by the campfire. What the letter describes is incredibly relatable to Curtin, but more than that, it's describing Curtin's aspiration, what he's done all this for. Cody had his dream life, and it was taken away. When the three approach the body, look at the difference in how Dobbs and Curtin are acting. Curtin holds his hands in front of him respectfully, and Dobbs strikes a casual pose and takes out some tobacco. When Howard pulls out a picture of Cody's girl, Dobbs says,
Not bad.
When Curtin's reading out the letter, Dobbs spends with her half rolling a cigarette, but as it goes on he starts paying more attention, and the camera focuses on his reactions. And when it's over, he's the one who says they should bury him. How he acts at first feels like performative callousness. He never liked Cody and they were going to kill him anyway, so why should he feel sad? Well, he does feel sad. After all that mess defending the mountain, the next scene is a kick in the teeth. The trio are panning and come up short, and Howard reckons they'll see a lot less from now on. Hearing this, Dobbs suggests they call it quits and leave. The sooner the better. Which isn't something I'd expect from him just a few scenes ago. Wonder what changed. Howard says it will take another week to break the mine down and put the mountain back in shape, which Dobbs doesn't understand, so Howard explains they wounded the mountain, so it's their job to close the wounds. It's the least they can do to show their gratitude for what he's given them. He adds if they don't want to help him, he'll do it himself. Curtin is confused why he's talking about the mountain like a real woman, but Dobbs says he'll help. It's done him better than any woman he's ever known. This is one of the scenes I see come up the most when people talk about Howard's character, and for good reason, but we'll come back to that. Right now I'm more interested in how Dobbs acts, because he's cheery, doesn't argue with Howard's Howardisms, and most importantly, is completely fine leaving, despite not having anywhere close to what he wanted around the campfire. The Gila monster incident put a rest to his worries about the trio, and that combined with the dourness of Cody's death seemed to have chilled him out. With that, the trio put everything as it was before they arrived, pack up, and begin their journey back to civilization, each possessing $35,000 in gold dust. With their leaving, now seems like a good time to look back and see how they've grown over the journey. Last time we went Dobbs, Curtin, Howard. So now let's go the other way. Howard has barely changed. Thank you, Howard, for being the only normal one. He's still old and still a coot, but we've seen that just because he doesn't take himself too seriously, doesn't mean we shouldn't. Almost every situation feels like something he's done 100 times before. When Dobbs acts weird, he notices. When tensions get high, he says just the right thing. And when the bandits are coming, he's the one to take charge. However, as the journey went on, the gap in knowledge closed. Even now, he still has an edge on the others, but he's not the unquestioned leader, if he ever was. Curtin is a more subtle character whose progression is communicated as much by his lack of action as what he ends up doing. Because of this, he's possibly the best character in this part of the film, as the audience needs to pay more attention and think for a second to understand how he got from point A to point B. When they left Tampico, he was an all-round swell fella who listened more than he spoke and was just happy to be included. But since they hit gold, he's been fighting with his greed. He considers leaving Dobbs for dead, hides and gets protective of his gold, and votes to kill Cody. The circumstances around Dobbs' cave-in were unrelated to Curtin, and the decision to leave him wasn't an active one. The universe presented him an opportunity for free money, which he could take by simply doing nothing, and because it was an accident, it wouldn't damage his relationship with Howard. He had nothing to lose and a ton to gain, but he still chose to save Dobbs. He got suspicious and protective of his gold. That was just in response to Dobbs acting shady. Remember, in a scene where the trio got in and out of bed, Curtin only got suspicious when he saw Dobbs was gone. Finally, there's the decision to kill Cody. There's no defending this, and Curtin knows that. Fortunately, kinda, the impact of this decision was taken away by the bandits, but its weight is still present on Curtin, and is likely to inform his decisions going forward. But if Curtin's just possibly the best, Dobbs is probably the best, having the most overt transformation. He was cuckoo before they arrived, but when the piles of gold started growing, he got more and more paranoid and aggressive with every scene, until it climaxed with the Gila monster incident, which could have been disastrous for everyone involved, but thanks to the level-headed actions of others, managed to put his worries to rest. Then Cody and the Bandits came along, who acted as common enemies to bring the group closer together. At this point in the story, the crew are closer than they've ever been, and after months of toil and hardship, they've reached the home stretch, with just a few days' travel between them and their end goal. Unfortunately, there's still 47 minutes left. Part 3. Defenestration. We fade to the three around a campfire after a day's travel, paralleling an earlier scene from the journey here, except there Curtin and Dobbs were out cold while Howard ate and played the harmonica. Now all three are awake, showing how much Dobbs and Curtin have grown, and the gap between the two and Howard has gone away, just as Howard said it would. Curtin's been thinking about Cody, his death still hanging over him, and suggests to the others they give his widow a fourth of their stash, just like if he'd been a partner from the start. As if not for him, they wouldn't have made it out alive. Howard agrees, but Dobbs dryly makes fun of them.
You two guys must have been born in a revival meeting.
Ah, there he is. He was moved by Cody's death, and the event helped put some things into perspective, but it didn't magically change his personality. Speaking of magic, that's an awful transition. They're approached by some natives who initially seem intimidating, but they sit around the fire together and share tobacco. Dobbs is confused why they're smoking each other's instead of their own, which, yeah, seeing how he's treated food in general exchanges, it's not surprising he'd missed the meaning behind sharing provisions. They sit around for a moment as it's impolite for natives to state their business outright, then the head of the group says a little boy fell in the river and won't wake up. Okay then. Howard leaves the two for the night and goes to the natives' village, to see if he can help. What happens next is unlike anything else in the film. 3 straight, slow minutes are spent on Howard reviving the child, as the whole village watches on. The presentation of this and the packing scene are two sides of the same coin, as they both take their time showing the character's process, while blowing grand music to put you in the mood. The packing scene's music was exciting, it felt like they were embarking on an adventure. This scene is somber, the track title is literally called Funeral Chant, and it feels like a religious moment where some saviour comes and brings the boy back to life. And just like the packing scene, and just like the last scene where they sat around for a moment before getting to business, it's important they take their time, because this changes everything. Howard succeeds, and goes off into the night. The following day, Howard tells the other two about what happened, revealing it wasn't anything serious and he just used a few scout tricks to wake the boy. When the boy's father arrives and tells him he left before they could properly honour him, Dobbs says, "Tell him he doesn't know what's a thing." I heard that, Mr. Tallarico. Unfortunately, the natives insist the trio come with them and stay as the man's guest for a few days, saying if they don't, all the saints in heaven will be angry. This is annoying as Howard was just saying how little he actually helped, but these are the same people who sat around smoking before asking to help a drowned child, because they didn't want to be rude. Dobbs thinks he can sort this out, which goes as expected. After weighing their options, Dobbs suggests only Howard go with them, and meet him and Curtin in a few days. Howard asks about his goods, and Dobbs says the natives might rob him if they discovered what they were, which feels like a stretch given how seriously they take hospitality, but Howard agrees to leave his stuff with them. They exchange their goodbyes, and also slurs because 1940s, and head their separate ways. Dobbs and Curtin smiles and waves, backed by uplifting music, is immediately followed by this, as the two trek through the desert and sit down for a break. This scene mirrors an earlier one from the initial journey. The duo sit down, drink water, and Dobbs complains. But before there was a sense of whimsy because they just started. Now the end's in sight, they just want it to be over. Any increased workload from Howard leaving isn't doing any favours. Dobbs is getting angry, blaming Howard's burrows for being the most trouble, blaming Curtin for saying they take them, and blaming Howard for ditching them, saying he knew what he was doing. Wow, that didn't take long. Curtin said they could take the burrows, but Dobbs is the one who said Howard shouldn't take them in the first place. And he didn't know what he was doing, he was visibly uncomfortable, and the least on board. With Howard gone, not only is there more work, but they've lost their steward and mediator. If he was here, he'd probably be able to calm Dobbs down, but without, Dobbs is reverting to how he was on the mountain. Curtin tries to say something and be the level-headed one, but he's not Howard, and he's tired himself. Dobbs is adamant about stopping here for the night. Curtin wants to keep going, but as things get more heated, he just agrees to cool things down. But even then, Dobbs doesn't like his phrasing, and insists he could totally keep going, he just doesn't want to. Curtin doesn't respond. That night the two have a friendly chat while Dobbs rocks back and forth very sanely. Dobbs reckons right now Howard's eating a good meal with tequila, wonders how much they have left to walk, and starts laughing. Then says Howard was an idiot for trying to make them do his work, but they'll show him. Curtin naturally has no idea what he's going on about, so Dobbs spells it out. They're going to forget about the old man and take his gold for themselves. Curtin tells him no. which is the final step in his character journey, but Dobbs interprets it as Curtin wanting all the gold for himself. Curtin tries to speak reason, but Dobbs only knows English. He claims to know who Curtin really is, and accuses him of wanting to kill him in his sleep. He pulls his gun out, but Curtin manages to disarm him. Curtin explains in no uncertain terms that he has no ill will towards Dobbs, and isn't his enemy. Dobbs says if that's true, to return his gun, and Curtin hands it over, but not before taking the bullets out. Curtin suggests they split up tomorrow, or even tonight, but Dobbs says he would shoot him in the back. Curtin just moves past this and suggests that he leave first, but Dobbs says then he'd wait to ambush him. Once again he's letting his imagination run away with him, creating scenarios in his head to fit whatever narrative he's pushing. Curtin asks why he wouldn't just shoot him now, and Dobbs says it's because he's a coward. He doesn't have the nerve to do it when he's looking him in the eye. Curtin says he'll just have to tie Dobbs up, to which Dobbs laughs, because good luck with that. Dobbs sits down and bets Curtin $105,000 he falls asleep first. The camera pulls back, and Dobbs laughs into the night. The next day the two trudge along. Dobbs hides behind a tree hoping to get the jump on Curtin, but Curtin spots him. Dobbs laughs again. I think this section is the happiest Dobbs is in the whole film. When night falls, the two lay around the campfire staring each other down, and Dobbs wins his bet. He sneaks up to Curtin, swipes his gun, and grabs onto him. Curtin asks if he's going to murder him, and Dobbs says no. Not murder. He's doing this to save his life, that Curtin would take the second his back was turned. He forces Curtin to his feet, pushes him into the bushes, and shoots him. And this is it. This is what the whole film's built towards. Ask anyone who's seen it, or even if they haven't, it's kind of predictable, what the message is, and they'll tell you it's greed with a capital G. This isn't wrong, but it feels overly simplistic given that there are 3 heroes, but only one of them breaks. And this is because, to quote the Lorax of all people, you can't really blame greed. No, that's stupid. You see, it's got a little worm inside. It's one that always needs to feed, and is never satisfied. But the more you try to find it, the more it likes to hide. That is a nasty little worm, and I like to call it pride. In the beginning, Dobbs isn't greedy. He's even quite generous, but as new opportunities are presented to him, and he's given nothing but time to think about them, his pride makes him feel entitled to more. Here he insults Howard for being stupid enough to leave them. Then when he tries to kill and rob Curtin, he calls it self-defense. Maybe because he's delusional enough to believe that, maybe because that's what he'd do and he can't comprehend Curtin being any better than him, so I guesses he's thinking the same way. Or maybe he wants to rob Curtin but needs some way to justify it to himself because he's too prideful to see himself as a common thief, like how he used beggar as an insult. Unlike Howard, who's very aware of and jokes about his shortcomings, Dobbs refuses to acknowledge his own, exploding at the mildest insult to his character. And unlike Curtin, who has the same urges as him, but fights them, and makes mistakes but reflects on them, Dobbs actively leans into and justifies his urges, and never learns anything he isn't willing to forget the second is beneficial to him. After shooting him, Dobbs walks back to the campfire. Slowly. He sits down. We see Curtin's arm move, and Dobbs wonders if he killed him, if he hit him, or if he missed and Curtin just fell down. He goes to check and waves his torch over him. He considers shooting him again, but can't, deciding he's definitely dead. He throws the gun to Curtin's feet, saying to keep it. It's his anyhow. He goes back to the fire, says to himself how it's not giving off much heat, and scoffs at the idea of having a conscience, which is a little bit on the nose. Just like with Cody, Dobbs is trying to stuff down his feelings, but these feelings are much more visceral. Curtin was his friend. More than that, he was his brother, one of the only 2 consistent sources of human contact he's had in 10 months. He worked by his side, slept by his side, fought by his side, pulled him from the rubble, forgave him for almost killing him for no reason, and who hesitated to come here in the first place because he was worried about it not being fair to him! The camera moves closer to Dobbs, and the film cuts back and forth between him and Curtin, as Dobbs tucks in and Curtin starts moving. Flames consume Dobbs' face, and we fade to some natives who find Curtin crawling around. This scene and the ones preceding it are nothing short of brilliant. The script is immaculate, showcasing every one of Dobbs' established attributes, and capping Curtin's arc of putting people before gold. The acting is... just look at him. That's the same guy we saw at the start of the film, but completely transformed. Which is also a good opportunity to shout out the incredible makeup, because these two look disgusting. They're filthy and tired, and you can feel how uncomfortable they are just being there. And of course there's the cinematography. This shot with the fire is unlike anything else in the film, because it's not trying to look subtle, it's trying to match Dobbs' manic energy. And it succeeds. Good job. In the morning, Dobbs is packed up and ready to continue his journey back to civilization. But he has one job left. He picks up a shovel, having saved Curtin's burial till last, and makes his way to where he left him. Dobbs' mind at this point is absolute mush. He tries to talk himself out of burying Curtin because he doesn't want to confront what he did. He's especially worried Curtin's eyes might be open, looking at him. But his paranoia won't let him leave until the evidence of his crime is hidden. Dobbs goes to where he shot Curtin, and his body's gone. Dobbs runs around yelling Curtin's name as if he'd ever call back, then stops, convinces himself a tiger must have dragged him away, and laughs maniacally. Meanwhile, in the native village, Howard's having the time of his life. Eating, drinking, smoking, and wearing clean clothes and receiving gifts. He even breaks the fourth wall as he's being served by a pretty woman. The past quarter of an hour has been intense, so this is an absurd but welcome tone shift given how dark the next Dobbs scene is going to be. Howard's paradise is interrupted by two guys who tell him Curtin's here, and Howard goes to tend to his wounds. So, after 2 days of walking through the desert, with no sleep and 2 bullets inside him that were shot at point blank range, Curtin dragged himself God knows how far, doubtlessly getting dirt and grime in his wounds, then travels for hours, probably on horseback, to a doctor who isn't a doctor and doesn't have access to modern, or even modern, medicine, and lives. I'm sorry, that man is dead! This is not Curtin. This is Curtin's zombified remains. I don't think he should have died, and the scene he's shot is too good to mess with, so I wouldn't change anything, but even if it's a necessary one, I would still consider it a flaw. And the biggest one in the film at that. You know, aside from the racism. Anyway, Curtin fills Howard in on what happened, and tells us what his thought process was. He thought Dobbs leaving the gun was to make it look like a suicide, which knowing the real reason is very generous to his mental capacities, and says he thought he'd come back to check on him in the morning, and considered waiting around to shoot him, but didn't because he was worried his injuries would make him miss. Let me repeat that. Curtin considered waiting around for hours, with his injuries so bad he couldn't even walk, to shoot Dobbs. I know I just pointed out how Curtin should be dead already, but if he'd done that, he would probably be dead. In-universe. And the only reason he didn't was because he couldn't guarantee he'd take Dobbs down with him. This shows how determined he is to get his revenge. Al tells him he's talking too much, but Curtin responds not to worry. He'll pull through this just to get that guy. A week ago they were practically brothers, but now all Dobbs is to Curtin is that guy. Howard sighs and says he can't blame Dobbs too much, reckoning he's just as honest as the next fella, which I think is supposed to be the film spelling out its message, but having spent the last looking at his character, no, not really. Once he's done doctoring, he gets up, gathers a group of natives, and goes after Dobbs. He doesn't want Curtin to go in his condition, but he's so determined he doesn't try stopping him. The film fades to the corpse of a burro that looks like it keeled over and had its gear stripped off. Definitely one of Dobbs's. Must have died and had its gold moved to another. The film fades again, with Dobbs on the floor in place of the dead burro, just to give you an idea of how he's doing right now. His face is caked in dirt and filth, and he can't walk for more than a few seconds without falling down. He stumbles upon some dirty water and races towards it, pushing past the burrows in his way to throw his face in and drink like an animal. This is an obvious low point for him, and demonstrates something Howard said on the way here. Sometimes water's more precious than gold. Dobbs is a scumbag who values his own gain over the well-being of others, but his obsession also drives him to forgo his own well-being. Whereas Howard said rather casually he'd trade his share for a few hand grenades, when that's what was needed to save their lives, which at this point, I can't see Dobbs doing. If he was in a rough spot and given an out in exchange for his gold, he'd ignore it and try to find some other way. Speaking of rough spots, remember who the trio were fighting when Howard said that? As Dobbs is drinking, someone approaches from behind. Given everything that's going on, you know it can't be anyone good, and the camera squeezes every bit of dread it can through a 31-second drip feed reveal. We see a figure approach through the pool's reflection. Dobbs slowly peeks. We get a close look at the reflection. By this point it's obvious who it is, but his face is still obscured. Dobbs turns around. We see his feet, the first unfiltered look at him, and cut to a close-up of Gold Hat. This is horror movie filmmaking, holding back information so you can't get a clear picture in your head. And when he is revealed, he dominates the frame and looks down from a higher angle. Dobbs is currently on his hands and knees looking up, putting him on a lower level, which is an immediate tone setter. And standing up doesn't help because in the same shot, 2 more bandits are revealed. Gold Hat doesn't recognise Dobbs, so they aren't immediately hostile, and strike up a very awkward conversation. Dobbs offers the 3 jobs as mule drivers, but he only offers them 2 pesos, which he doesn't even have, and also they're bandits, so that doesn't go anywhere. Gold Hat asks if he's alone, and Dobbs says no, he has friends behind him, but the bandits can't see anyone for miles, and even if they took his word for it, what would it have accomplished? Everyone knows what's about to happen, but Dobbs keeps dragging his feet, and it's unnerving how calm the bandits are. They're in no hurry. Gold Hat sits down and smokes, while another inspects Dobbs like a mannequin. Finally, Gold Hat realises who he is, which Dobbs can only deny. While they were chatting, there was no music, using stillness to build anticipation, but now the music kicks in, marking a shift in the tone, and the bandits drop the polite pretenses. Gold Hat looks at the Burrows, and Dobbs tries to offer them a job again. When this doesn't work, he tries to leave, and they stop him. He tells them to get away, and pulls out his gun, but they're not afraid of death. Dobbs backs up, pulls the trigger, and nothing. It's empty. Curtin took the bullets out. The gun Dobbs used to shoot him was his own, and Dobbs threw it away. The bandits laugh and he dives for a machete on the Burrow, but a bandit strikes him with a rock, and Gold Hat takes the machete, and in what is both the most shocking and predictable moment of the film, drives it into him. Dobbs grunts, gets struck a second time, and he's dead. The film has three main characters, but Dobbs was the main character, the one we started with, spent the most time with, got to know the most, who's been through the most development. When you look up the movie's posters, it's his face first and foremost. And not only did the movie kill him, a pretty uncommon thing to do even nowadays, he died in such a pathetic, underwhelming, and completely unnecessary way. These guys don't even have weapons. If he had more foresight and not thrown away Curtin's gun, or remembered to reload his own when walking through bandit country, he might have been able to kill them, or at least take one or two down in a proper last stand. If he hadn't been so greedy, Curtin would be here with him. They wouldn't be so outnumbered, and could have fought or scared them off. Or two people, they could have controlled the Burrows better, got here at a different time, and missed them completely. And if he hadn't been so paranoid about the people who valued hospitality above all else, that owed Howard a great debt, he could be relaxing in a native village with his friends right now. There were so many little things that needed to line up, so many variables that if they'd been different, he might have stood a chance. But all of them depend on Dobbs not being who he is. So while in theory the situation was entirely avoidable, in motion, it never could have gone any other way. Fitting for someone so prideful to have such a pathetic end, and at their own hand. Now, let's talk about the physical death itself. When I first saw this, I thought the scene was pretty brutal, but then I read an early draft of the script and oh, snappers! So what's happening in this scene isn't just the bandit shoving the machete into Dobbs, they cut his whole head off. You can see them watch as it rolls down the hill into the pool, leaving a trail of blood and bobbling the water. Apparently, this was supposed to be shown, and they even filmed it, but it was 1948, so the censors weren't having any of it. Humphrey Bogart in particular was unhappy with the change, apparently saying, "What's wrong with showing a guy getting his head cut off?" Eric Lax, Bogart biographer, mentions this quote in the audio commentary for the film.
Larry, what's wrong with a guy getting his head cut off?
So I believe this part, but personally I don't believe it. Cool story though. As soon as he's dead, his killers rob his corpse, and get into a petty argument over his shoes that escalates into a moment bordering on slapstick, where one pushes the other into the water where Dobbs' severed head lies. Just look at the camera placement. Dobbs is out of frame. The only acknowledgement he's here is the guy ransacking his body, and the camera is centered on these guys' petty squabble. The camera ignoring Dobbs would probably be done anyway because censors suck, but that's not always a bad thing. And it really works here. The Burrows get spooked and run away, and the bandits chase after them, completely forgetting Dobbs. They catch them and rifle through their loot. In doing so, they find the gold, mistake it for bags of sand, and immediately chuck it out, unknowingly spitting on everything Dobbs worked for. Having such an important character die so unceremoniously is a big risk, and really easy to mess up. Yes, I'm still mad, but how it's done here is the absolute gold standard. It's shocking, memorable, and absolutely perfect for him, and I wouldn't have it any other way. We briefly fade to Howard, Curtin, and the natives on horseback, just to remind you they're still around. Then fade to the bandits arriving in Durango, as they try to sell their stolen hides. And it's a really satisfying scene to watch, because the townfolk are pretty quick to what's going on. A little boy sees the bandits enter the town and recognises the Burrows. Remember the scene where the trio were buying Burrows, and I pointed out how the film spent a lot of time on not a lot happening so you'd remember? Well, it was setting up this. While the boy does his thing, the other townsfolk take a look at the bandits, particularly their clothing, and how some articles are noticeably better than others. A reverse of what that one bandit was doing to Dobbs, and like Dobbs, they're completely trapped. But unlike Dobbs, they don't all realise. The lackeys do, but a merchant distracts Gold Hat long enough for the federales to surround them, and quietly take away the machete. Once they're ready, the town confronts the bandits and lock them up. Gold Hat puts his head through the door and yells angrily. We fade to our heroes on horseback now approaching the ruins, then back to the town, where the three bandits are digging their own graves and bickering with each other. They're lined up, Gold Hat asks if he can die in his sombrero and they say yes, and boom. They die just as Curtin and Howard arrive. Fun is a strange way of describing an execution, but I think it's accurate. Everything with the bandits in the village is cathartic comeuppance for their actions throughout the film, and it's presented with some playful dark comedy. After the execution, the burro breeder approaches Howard, recognising him, and tells him what happened. Howard tells Curtin that Dobbs was killed by bandits, and he's surprised, but quickly moves on to the gold.
Dobbs is dead.
What?
Yeah, bandits got him.
Our goods? What about our goods?
Bry does not care. Good for him. The villagers take the duo to their belongings, and they search through them, but can't find the gold. The boy tells Howard he overheard the bandits talk about dumping bags of sand near the ruins outside town, and they head straight off. Unfortunately, a sandstorm hits, and the movie overwhelms your senses. Sand and dust shroud the view, and the wind and ominous music blare as Curtin and Howard race to the ruins and search around aimlessly. A native finds a torn bag and hands it to Howard, and it's obvious what happened. It's gone. $105,000 and 10 months of back-breaking labour, gone with the wind. Howard just stands there for a moment, not quite sure how to react, and then starts chuckling. He throws the bag away, and then he looks at Curtin and starts absolutely howling. The natives laugh too. They don't know what he's laughing about, but it's infectious, and then Curtin joins in too. For once I'll be brief because I can't do this laugh justice. You can feel every bit of pain and tension being released. They worked and they fought and they died, just for an epic and cruel string of bad luck to screw them over right before they reach the finish line. So they have two options: laugh or cry. The two break away from the group and sit. When they calm down, they start laughing again. And when they calm down from that, they talk. Curtin asks Howard what's next. Howard says he's got a good setup with the natives as a medicine man, and asks Curtin about himself. Curtin says he doesn't know, which Howard says not to worry about. He's still young. He's got enough time to make several more fortunes. Thanks to the laughing fit, Curtin has calmed down and is seeing things more clearly, and tells Howard he's not any worse than he was in Tampico, especially compared to Dobbs. Howard asks if there's anywhere he wants to go, and says he can have his share of the money for the hides if he visits Cody's widow, adding it's July, in time for the fruit harvests. The two saddle up, shake hands, say their goodbyes, and ride away. The camera lingers and goes down, holding on an empty gold bag, caught on a cactus. The final minutes are a gut punch, but from the reviews I've read, the general consensus is that the ending is a sad one, and I just can't agree with that. Howard became a medicine man, a cozy job where he could help people in a closely knit community that adores him. He explicitly says that this will do him for the rest of his natural life, which is the film giving him a happily ever after. Curtin got screwed over, but he says himself he's not much worse off than he was at the start, and as Howard says, he's young, he's got his whole life ahead of him. And from this adventure he has gained one thing, and that's something to do next. In Tampico he was trapped in limbo, sleeping on a park bench in a foreign country, waiting for a job that would give him just enough money to live until his next job. Now he's headed back to his home state in America, with purpose and aspirations. And Dobbs is dead. These are certainly bittersweet endings given what they were so close to getting, but ultimately I couldn't think of anything more appropriate. And that is The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. The fact this was even made and released is a miracle. The original novel had pretty explicit anti-capitalist themes, which wouldn't have flown during the Cold War. And Humphrey Bogart goes mad and dies, leading to an ending which studio president Jack L. Warner thought would alienate audiences. On top of that, John Huston really liked to shoot on location, and filming took months instead of the promised in and out. Warner thought he was signing up for a simple B picture. If he'd known the true scale, chances are he would have immediately written it off. The film got Huston an Oscar for directing at the 1949 Academy Awards, and he used his very brief speech to thank the film's producer, Henry Blanke, who made the film possible. But there's still more. Even looking past all that, the fact that such a good movie came from this book is amazing to me, because the book's good, but it's not this good. Huston made huge cuts, removing entire chapters worth of thematically strong material that didn't add all that much to the plot or characters, like the silver mine, the vaccines, and the part where Dobbs and two unrelated bozos hide up a tree all night because they mistook a donkey for a tiger. It's a lot less interesting than it sounds. He also switched some of Dobbs and Curtin's dialogue and added a good chunk of his own. So many of my favourite scenes just aren't in the book. Luckily we spend 11 pages on the rooms, patrons, managers, and what happens to the luggage in the hotel we ditched after the first chapter, so it's not all bad, right? Credit where it's due, this does serve a function. It's just not something you'd make into a film. But these guys did. And it's fantastic. It's dark, whimsical, sad, funny, bleak, hopeful. It makes bold decisions that might alienate audiences, whilst also having something for everyone. It's the kind of movie someone could spend over a year making a video on, going scene by scene, line by line, and still find things to appreciate. It's one of my favourite movies, and I can't see that changing anytime soon. Thanks for watching. Hello there! If you made it to the end, consider liking, subscribing, and maybe giving my Patreon a look. It would help out a lot. Okay, bye.